The morning sun had barely broken through the clouds when Huey Ying stood in her kitchen, preparing her usual breakfast of soft-boiled eggs and toast. The familiar scent of brewing coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint notes of classical music playing softly in the background. The world outside was quiet, calm, a perfect start to a peaceful day. At 70 years old, Huey Ying had come to cherish these simple moments. Her husband, Harold, had passed away a few years ago, leaving her to navigate the world alone. But she wasn't lonely. She had her son, Hong Wai, and her young grandson, Zhai Wai, who lived nearby. Life wasn't perfect, but it was good. That morning, however, everything was about to change. The front door opened with a creak, and Charlotte, Hong Wai's wife, walked in. Her heels clicked sharply on the hardwood floor as she made her way toward the kitchen. Huey Ying didn't look up, knowing exactly what was coming. She had already sensed something off in the air that morning. It wasn't long before Charlotte spoke, her voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. "We decided you're not coming. My mom will go instead." Huey Ying froze for a moment, the knife she was holding suspended midair. The words echoed in her mind, though they barely registered at first. Charlotte continued, oblivious to the shock she had just delivered. "I don't want to babysit an old lady during my vacation," Charlotte sneered, casually sipping coffee from Huey Ying's favorite mug, one Harold had bought for her on their honeymoon. Huey Ying's grip tightened, but her face remained perfectly composed. She set the knife down and returned to her toast. "Have a nice trip," she replied calmly, her voice steady, though her heart ached in ways she couldn't express. Hong Wai stood behind Charlotte, his face a mixture of discomfort and guilt, but he didn't speak. Zhai Wai, their young son, stood beside his mother, staring at his shoes, clearly embarrassed by the harshness of his mother's words. But like always, he remained silent too. Charlotte smirked, thinking she'd won. "Oh, honey, if only she knew," she muttered under her breath, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You'll never survive all that walking anyway. My mom loves cruises, right?" Huey Ying could feel the sting of those words, but she did nothing to show it. She had long known how Charlotte viewed her, not as a mother-in-law, but as an inconvenience, something to be discarded when it no longer suited her needs. "I'll manage," Huey Ying said, her voice gentle but unwavering. "Take care of Zhai Wai while you're away." With that, Charlotte and Hong Wai left to pack, their departure punctuated by the faint sound of the front door closing behind them. Huey Ying stood still in the kitchen for a long moment, the words swirling in her mind. "I don't want to babysit an old lady." She was 70, yes, but she wasn't decrepit. She had run marathons in her 50s. She was a trauma nurse for 40 years, strong, sharp, and more than capable. Yet Charlotte thought she was no longer of any use. Huey Ying took a deep breath. This was more than just about the vacation. Charlotte's cruelty was only the surface of a much deeper issue. Something had been changing in her daughter-in-law for months. Small signs. A shift in behavior that didn't quite add up. Huey Ying had learned long ago to read people, to see beyond the masks they wore, and Charlotte's mask was slipping. With the door closed behind them, Huey Ying made her way to the bedroom. She walked to the drawer where she kept her most important documents, the ones hidden beneath old photo albums and forgotten keepsakes. She pulled out a manila envelope and opened it. Inside were phone records, bank statements, and several very telling photographs. The evidence was clear. For the last 3 months, Charlotte had been taking late meetings, staying out until midnight, far too late for someone who was supposed to be at home with her family. When she suddenly started picking up Zhai Wai from school every day, something was wrong. Charlotte, the woman who once claimed she didn't have time for such things, was playing a role, and Huey Ying was no fool. Huey Ying had suspected something for a while, but now, with this new evidence in hand, it was time to act. She reached for the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Detective Rodriguez," she said when he answered. "I need a favor." In the quiet of the early morning, as Huey Ying sipped her tea, a plan began to take shape, one that would not only expose the truth but would also protect her family. After all, she was no longer just a mother and grandmother who needed protection. Now, she was a woman on a mission. The days that followed were filled with a quiet, unspoken determination. While Huey Ying went about her daily life, maintaining the calm and routine she cherished, her mind was racing. She had been gathering pieces of a puzzle for months, and now the pieces were starting to form a picture she couldn't ignore. The envelope she had hidden away in her drawer contained far more than bank statements and phone records. It was the evidence she needed to confront the truth. Charlotte, with her deceitful charm, had underestimated her. Now, Huey Ying was about to flip the script. A few days after her conversation with Detective Rodriguez, he called her back, as promised. "I've got the information you asked for," he said. "I'm sending someone over to collect the evidence you have." Huey Ying nodded, her fingers gripping the edge of the kitchen table as the realization settled in. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady. "This isn't just about the money. It's about protecting my family. It's about the truth." She hung up the phone, feeling a small weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in months, she felt like she had the upper hand. 2 days later, a man named Aaron arrived at her doorstep. He was a young private investigator with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor. He introduced himself, and with a handshake, the formalities were over. "I've been briefed," Aaron said, taking a seat at her kitchen table. "Let's see what we have." Huey Ying opened the manila envelope, carefully pulling out the documents and photographs, spreading them in front of him. The photos were damning. Charlotte and her law partner, Richard Hayes, in a BMW, laughing, clearly more than just colleagues. The bank records showed multiple withdrawals that couldn't be explained, money taken from the firm's client trust fund, money that wasn't hers to touch. And then there were the phone records, with late-night calls that spanned hours, often from places far from her office. "This is a lot," Aaron muttered, flicking through the documents. "This woman is playing a dangerous game." "I knew something was wrong," Huey Ying said quietly, "but I didn't have proof. Now I do." They spent the next hour going over the evidence in detail. Aaron made copies of everything, each document, each photo, and left with a promise to continue digging. The following week, Huey Ying sat in her lawyer's office, Marcus Webb, a man who had been a steady presence in her life since Harold's passing. He had been with her through thick and thin, and she trusted him like family. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Marcus asked, eyeing the stack of documents on his desk. "This is going to turn your family upside down. And it's not just Charlotte we're dealing with. This could have legal repercussions for Hong Wai, too." Huey Ying paused, her fingers resting on the top of the stack. She looked at Marcus, her expression unreadable. "I didn't raise my son to be a pawn in someone else's game," she said quietly. "And I certainly didn't raise him to let anyone manipulate him or take advantage of his family. This is not just about Charlotte. This is about teaching him what it means to protect what you love. No one can keep treating me like I'm invisible anymore, and no one will ever come between me and my grandson again." Marcus nodded, his face softening. "Then we proceed. I'll get the documents in order. It's time to show them what happens when you mess with the wrong woman." The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings, and meticulous planning. Huey Ying kept her composure, but inside the storm was brewing. "You ready?" Marcus asked a week later as they stood outside the courthouse. His tone was steady, but his eyes held a glint of approval. "I'm ready," Huey Ying replied, the weight of what she was about to do settling into her bones. "I've waited long enough for this." As they entered the courthouse, her heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and relief. There was no turning back now. This wasn't just about protecting her family anymore. It was about taking control of her life for the first time in decades. Meanwhile, back at her house, Charlotte was preparing for her next move. She had no idea what was coming. She had become too comfortable in her deceit, too sure of her ability to manipulate Hong Wai and Zhai Wai. "I'll make sure this vacation is the last straw," she muttered to herself, glancing at her reflection in the mirror. She was preparing for what she assumed would be another peaceful trip, another victory. What she didn't realize was that it wasn't just her plans that were about to crumble. It was everything she had carefully constructed, and it was all going to fall apart because of one woman, Huey Ying. That afternoon, Marcus called her again, his voice urgent. "We're ready," he said. "The evidence is in, and we're filing the charges. This is going to hit harder than you expect." Huey Ying took a deep breath, her hand resting on the old family photo of her and Harold on their wedding day. "It's time to stop being quiet," she whispered, looking at the photo with resolve. "Time to make some noise." As she hung up the phone, a sense of calm washed over her. She had fought for everything in her life, her career, her family, her love. And now, she would fight to protect what was rightfully hers. Charlotte had underestimated her. That would be her greatest mistake. The following week passed in a blur of tension and anticipation. Huey Ying spent her days with a quiet, determined resolve, knowing that the moment she had been waiting for was rapidly approaching. The courtroom battle would soon begin, but her first step had been completed. The legal documents were filed, the evidence was in place, and the accusations were out in the open. She couldn't help but notice a slight change in Zhai Wai's behavior. He was more distant, a bit colder. The unease that had settled over their family after the revelations about Charlotte had begun to creep into their everyday lives. He couldn't bring himself to fully believe the truth about his wife. How could he? It was his marriage, his family, his love for her that had blinded him for so long. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Huey Ying had hoped for the best, but reality had shown her that sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who need protecting the most. That morning, the day of the first hearing, Huey Ying dressed carefully, wearing a light gray blouse and dark trousers, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. She wasn't trying to make an impression. She wasn't trying to look anything other than strong, steady, and sure. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the envelope containing the photographs, the bank records, the text messages, everything that would lead to the truth. Zhai Wai walked into the kitchen as she was finishing her coffee. His expression was unreadable, his eyes shadowed with doubt. He didn't want to face the truth, but he knew it was coming. And still, there was a part of him that wanted to protect his wife. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" he asked, his voice low, tinged with hesitation. "You know what it might mean for the family." Huey Ying met his gaze, her eyes soft but resolute. "I have to do this, Zhai Wai. This isn't just for me, it's for us, for Zhai Ming. We can't let this go on any longer. Your wife's actions have consequences." The tension in the air between them was palpable. Zhai Wai took a step back, his hand resting on the doorframe. "I don't know how to process this. I thought I knew her." "You did," she replied softly, "but now it's time for the truth to come out." She left without another word, knowing that the day ahead would change everything. The courthouse was a cold, imposing place, and as Huey Ying entered the building, she felt the weight of the world bearing down on her. She was calm, but beneath the surface, her heart was racing. The courtroom was crowded with reporters and legal teams, all of them eager to see what would unfold next. She spotted Charlotte sitting at the defendant's table, looking as confident and polished as ever. She gave her a tight-lipped smile, but there was no warmth in her eyes, only a cold, calculated look that said she still thought she could win. "Your Honor, we're here today to address serious accusations of financial misconduct, embezzlement, and potential child endangerment," Huey Ying's lawyer, Marcus Webb, said, standing tall and firm before the judge. "The defendant, Charlotte, has been implicated in a scheme to steal from clients and to manipulate her husband and his family for her personal gain." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, but Charlotte remained stoic, her expression never wavering. Huey Ying felt a flicker of satisfaction. It was time for Charlotte to face the consequences of her actions. As the prosecutor presented their case, Marcus slid the envelope of evidence onto the table. *** photographs of Charlotte meeting with Richard Hayes at late-night hours. Texts proving their affair. Bank statements showing the missing client funds. Everything was laid bare. There was no escape, no room for denial. Charlotte's mask of perfection began to crack, but it was the next piece of evidence that truly hit the hardest. Marcus held up a set of photos, the ones of Charlotte and Richard planning their getaway, talking in hushed tones about taking Zhai Ming away. The court gasped in unison. "She was planning to kidnap my grandson," Huey Ying said quietly, her voice carrying across the room, cutting through the shock. "She was planning to take him out of the country and disappear, and I won't let that happen, not to my family." There was a heavy silence in the courtroom. Charlotte looked as though she had been struck, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. It was clear that she had underestimated the lengths to which Huey Ying would go. She had no idea how carefully her every move had been watched. After the session ended, Huey Ying sat in her lawyer's office, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The hardest part was over, but there was still so much more to come. Charlotte would fight back, of course, but Huey Ying was ready for it. She had been preparing for years. When she looked at the photographs of her family, Zhai Ming, and even Charlotte at their happiest moments, she could feel the weight of the past and how far she had come since then. Charlotte had hurt her, but the truth was now in her hands. It was no longer about revenge. It was about justice, and justice would always come out on top. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the judge entered, his black robes swishing softly against the marble floor. Huey Ying sat at the back, her eyes fixed on the woman who had once been the center of her son's life, now sitting at the defendant's table, her smug mask slipping for the first time. The judge had ordered the case to proceed swiftly, and now it was time for Charlotte to face the consequences of her actions. Her lawyer had tried to paint her as a misunderstood woman under extreme stress, but the evidence Huey Ying had brought to light was undeniable. The embezzlement, the affair, and the attempted kidnapping of Zhai Ming. The truth had a way of tearing apart the lies. "Your Honor, the evidence we have presented is clear. We have photographic proof of the defendant's affair, documents showing the transfer of client funds, and text messages detailing plans to take my grandson and disappear. This is not a simple case of financial mismanagement. This is a deliberate act of deception and manipulation that endangered a child." Marcus Webb, Huey Ying's lawyer, spoke with calm conviction, his voice carrying the weight of truth. Charlotte tried to maintain her composed demeanor, but her hands were shaking slightly. She looked over at Zhai, who sat beside his mother, his face hard and unreadable. "Your Honor, I'm not denying that I made mistakes." Charlotte finally spoke, her voice wavering, but she quickly regained her composure. "But I didn't mean for it to go this far. Yes, I had an affair. Yes, I borrowed money, but I never intended to hurt anyone. I did what I did out of love for my husband and because I wanted a better future for us." A murmur went through the courtroom. Zhai stared at her in disbelief, the mask of a perfect family crumbling around him. How could he have been so blind? How could he have trusted someone who had hurt his own flesh and blood so deeply? "You never intended to hurt anyone." Huey Ying's voice rang out, her words sharp. "You planned to steal from clients. You manipulated your husband. And worse, you thought you could just take my grandson and vanish without anyone knowing. How could you not have known the damage you were causing?" Charlotte flinched, but she remained silent, her head bowed. The silence in the courtroom felt deafening. The prosecutor stepped forward. "This isn't just about stolen money, Your Honor. This is about trust. The trust of a husband, a mother, a child. Charlotte's actions broke that trust beyond repair. And her manipulation of the family, her scheme to take Zhai Ming from his mother and father, was nothing short of a premeditated crime. The judge nodded solemnly, the room holding its breath as he prepared to give his ruling. Hui Ying sat in her seat, her hands tightly clasped together, but inside she was calm. She had fought for this moment, waited years for it, and now that it was here, she could feel the truth of it deep in her bones. The truth was no longer hidden in the shadows. It had been dragged into the light for all to see. In light of the evidence presented and the severity of the defendant's actions, I hereby sentence Charlotte Mitchell to 5 years in a state prison, with the possibility of parole after 2 years. Her legal license is to be permanently revoked, and restitution to the victims will be required. A wave of relief washed over Hui Ying. 5 years was not nearly enough for the damage Charlotte had caused, but it was something. She had hoped for justice, and now she had it. After the court session, Hui Ying walked out into the bright sunlight. Her heart was light, but there was an undercurrent of sadness. She had done what needed to be done, but the cost was not small. Her son, Zhai Wei, would need time to heal, and Zhai Ming would grow up with a fractured family, one that might never fully mend. "Are you okay?" Marcus Webb asked, walking beside her. "I will be," Hui Ying said, offering a small, tired smile. "I just want my family back. I want to protect them." At home that evening, Zhai Wei finally spoke up. "I don't know what to say, Mom." He sat at the kitchen table, staring down at his hands. "I've spent so long pretending things were fine, but you were right. I should have seen it. I should have protected you." "It's not your fault," Hui Ying said softly, sitting down beside him. "You didn't know, none of us did, but we're here now and we'll be okay. We'll rebuild, one step at a time." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of everything they had been through hanging between them. Zhai Wei reached across the table and took her hand, his fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know how to fix this, but I'll try. I'll do anything to make things right, Mom. We'll start by being honest with each other," Hui Ying said, her voice steady but warm. "And we'll forgive when it's time, but we have to heal first." That night, as they sat together in the quiet of their home, Zhai Ming ran into the room, his face bright and full of energy. "Grandma, I finished my homework. Can we play chess?" "Of course we can," Hui Ying said, smiling for the first time in days. "Let's play, my dear." As the night wore on, Hui Ying felt a sense of peace settle over her. The battle wasn't over and the scars would remain, but her family had survived. They would rebuild together, and with time they would thrive. Months passed, and life slowly began to return to a sense of normalcy. The family had weathered the storm together, each of them carrying their own scars, but the foundation of truth and honesty was what held them together. Hui Ying woke each morning with a new sense of purpose, knowing that despite everything, they were moving forward. The legal battles were far from over. Charlotte had appealed the sentence, but her chances of a successful reversal were slim. The stolen money would be returned, and restitution to the victims would be made, but the emotional damage was something that couldn't be fixed by any court ruling. Hui Ying knew that her family still had a long road ahead, but at least they were walking it together. One crisp morning, Zhai Wei came into the kitchen, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. He stood in the doorway for a moment, holding a piece of paper in his hand. "Mom, I think I've finally come to terms with everything." He hesitated, then handed her the letter. Hui Ying looked at the letter. It was from Zhai Wei's law firm, an official letter informing him that they had decided to offer him a partnership. It was the opportunity he had dreamed about for years, the position he thought he'd lost forever when his life became consumed with his toxic marriage and the fallout of Charlotte's actions. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Zhai Wei admitted, his voice cracking. "How do I go back to normal? How do I step into the life I once wanted? Huey Ying placed the letter down and looked at her son. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the emotional toll of the past months. You don't need to rush back to normal, dear, she said gently. Normal has a funny way of changing. What matters is that you're moving forward, even if it's one small step at a time. Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set, Huey Ying found herself in her garden, tending to the flowers she had carefully nurtured over the years. Gardening had become her therapy, a way to reconnect with herself and the world around her after everything had fallen apart. As she pruned the roses, she felt a sense of peace. She had spent so many years taking care of everyone else, putting others' needs before her own, that it was hard for her to remember a time when she had cared for herself. Now, she was learning to do just that. Every day, it was a little easier. Suddenly, she heard the familiar hum of a car pulling into the driveway. Zhai Ming rushed out of the house, his face bright with excitement. "Grandma, I made the school soccer team," he shouted, running into her arms. Huey Ying laughed and hugged him tightly. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I knew you could do it." As Zhai Ming excitedly talked about his new teammates and the upcoming game, Huey Ying watched him, feeling an overwhelming sense of pride. Despite everything that had happened, her family was healing, and the love they shared had only deepened. A few weeks later, Huey Ying found herself sitting across from William Harrison, the retired judge who had become a steady presence in her life. Their friendship had grown over the months, and what started as casual coffee mornings had turned into something much deeper. "So, what's next for you, Huey Ying?" William asked, his eyes warm and kind. "Next?" She laughed softly. "I think I'm just going to keep living. No grand plans, just the simple things, like helping Zhai Ming with his soccer, spending time with my family, and, well, maybe taking a few days off to enjoy life. I think I deserve it." William smiled. "You do, and you've earned every moment of it. If you ever need someone to share it with, I'm right here." There was a pause, a moment of quiet understanding between them. Huey Ying had never thought she would find love again after Harold's death, but life had a funny way of surprising her. Maybe love didn't have to come in grand gestures. Maybe it came in small, steady moments. The weeks turned into months, and Zhai Wei slowly settled into his new role at the law firm. His relationship with his mother had never been stronger, and his relationship with Zhai Ming was growing in ways that neither of them had expected. There were still moments of pain, moments when Zhai Wei wondered how things could have been different, but he learned to accept that he couldn't change the past. All he could do was move forward, and he was learning to do that. One afternoon, as the three of them sat together in the garden, watching Zhai Ming kick a soccer ball across the lawn, Zhai Wei turned to his mother. "Mom, thank you for everything, for protecting us, for not giving up." Huey Ying smiled softly. "I did what any mother would do. I protected the people I love, and that's all that matters." The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the family. The past was behind them, and the future was waiting. There was no way to know what it would bring, but for the first time in a long while, Huey Ying felt ready for whatever came next.